Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. I will be sharing with you some contemplations for the week of April 24th, 2023, which is this coming week. And as always, the reminder that I would like to share with all of you is to remember to turn inwards as you are listening to this information. Allow this contemplation and this time that you've spent, that you've set aside to listen to this episode to be a time that you let information that is within your own system come up and meet you and meet your conscious mind. And I'm also reminding you that always takes precedence over what I'm actually saying here. Right? That the point is for you to tickle your own unconscious, subconscious mind to tell you what it is that you would like to pay attention to for the next week or so. And also, if this episode found you outside of the week that that I recorded it or that it's meant to be for astrologically, these transmissions, these contemplations are also designed for you to be able to enjoy the wisdom that's in it without maybe necessarily having it tied to astrology, right? That there may be some messages here for you that are pertinent and relevant for this particular moment in your life. Okay, so let's get to it. I will start, as always, with a little bit of an overview of the astrology. We have a pretty quiet week astrologically after the sun moved into Taurus, the solar eclipse, and the Mercury retrograde that started last week. This week on Monday, the 24th, the sun in Taurus is going to conjoin the North Node, and Vesta is also together with the sun in the North Node. On Tuesday, the 25th, sun in Taurus will create a sextile to Saturn in Pisces, and then we have a quiet week astrologically. On Saturday, the 29th, Mars in Cancer will create a sextile to Uranus in Taurus, right? So I'm really thinking about how up until last week, a lot of the astrological configuration was fire dominant, right? Whereas this week, it suddenly became earth dominant, and we also have some very special players, right, in water. And the Taurus planets are also currently answering to Venus, which is in Gemini. So this is quite a shift, right, in temperature. I am thinking about how one of my teachers, Diana Rose Harper, mentions that fire signs are always followed by earth signs, right, in the zodiac. And so it's interesting to be thinking about how the integration of fiery inspirations, explosions, life force moving through us in very forceful way into earthly materials is deeply helpful. And if you believe that the zodiac wheel is some sort of reflection of the nature or the mechanism of this incarnate reality, then there's something to how earth follows fire, right? There's something about earth that perhaps is deeply grounding to the fiery process. I've been thinking about how the earth is an editor, the earth is a guardian, the earth is a wise auntie, maybe, right? And this week, there's some assistance from watery energies too, right? With Mars and Saturn specifically, both of them are traditionally considered malefics, being in water signs, right? The past week's solar eclipse may have felt like firework, like burning house, like overflow of passion, right? After all, it happened in the sign of Aries. Aries is not exactly known for being a master of the art of subtlety, right? Aries energy is quite in our face. Aries energy screams from the depth of the primal life force, right? Aries energy kind of rushes in because the truth is that fire, right, is an element often associated with inspiration, and inspiration moves quickly, right? In order to get something going, in order to get a project started, in order to get a relationship started, right? We need that initial rush. We need that initial excitement of, wow, what an exciting idea. What an exciting environment, right? What an exciting person. Like, I can't wait to kiss this person, right? There's that energy with Aries because to start something, a lot of friction is required, right? One analogy that I love for Aries energy is a match. You know, in order to light a match, you need to strike it, right, onto some sort of harsh or kind of not smooth surfaces, right? The matchbox often has this kind of rather frictiony texture to it, right? It's necessary. That friction is necessary to start the fire. And so when anything happens in the realm of the Aries, right, there tends to be more movement, there tends to be more friction, more flare than maybe what's actually at the heart of the situation, right? There may be more fireworks than is the truth, you know, of any given situation. Once that firework kind of dissipates, maybe you see that something is not as big as you thought it was. I mean, again, to go back to the analogy of the match, right? When I look at a match, when I light a match, the fire itself makes, you know, it's not clear how big the match is, right? Because you're kind of just focused on the fire, and the fire can look quite large and quite attention grabbing. You may find yourself in the heart of a relational conflict, right? Some sort of relational conflict, be it with another person, or be it with yourself, or some parts of yourself, or some sort of environment in your life. You might find yourself in a conflict with a partner, a friend, a family member, right? This past week, especially with the solar eclipse kicking things around. And yet, the kerfuffle around it, right? The heat that is felt, the rage that is at display may actually be quite a bit more dramatic than the truth itself, right? It may really feel like something big was going down. This week, my sense is that we will experience some level of relief. In fact, you may already be feeling that right now, right? Because if you've been following these contemplations, I mentioned last week that the solar eclipse was really interesting. It was happening in 29-degree Aries. And so there's a sense of like, you know, that new moon or that heat that we were feeling in the Aries realm, in the Aries landscape, quickly moved into the more grounded, right? The more cold earth of Taurus. And so it's not, I think it's important to also mention, specifically with the fact that we are in the middle of eclipse season, we're in the middle of a Mercury retrograde, right? That it's not that resolution is here, right? That whatever situation you may be experiencing may not be in its final form yet. It may not be that things were kicked up and this coming week you're ready for the resolution, right? However, I think again the shift from fire to earth is quite interesting, because the translation from fire to earth may mean that quite a bit of fire is put out. And so if you've ever lit a match and then kind of put it into the ground, right? Or maybe if you have ever lit a joint and then dropped it into the ground, then naturally the earth has this cooling effect, right? Anybody who's experienced that knows that what happens when the match, right, that had the fire when it was dropping, right, and then when it hit the earth, either it burned something, right, or the fire is just kind of put out, right? I like thinking about how, without any other, flammable items around it, right? When the fire hits a ground and there's enough moisture in the ground, right? And there's a large enough mass of earth, fire can no longer burn bright. And so Taurus, being a fixed earth sign, has quite a bit of earth to counteract the Aries energy, right? When we enter the Taurian realm, we may experience that a lot of the conflicts, the big realizations, the larger than life declarations, right, that we experienced in the past week, they may really dissipate and calm down quite a bit. This isn't because there's no truth to that fiery energy. There certainly probably is something really valid about that fire that moved through us collectively, personally last week. But we may find that not all of it was actually necessary for us to continue learning the lesson we're supposed to learn, right? I like to think about this in terms of the body, right? The body simply can't stay in constant activation, right? How long can you actually stay angry? How long can you actually stay aroused, right? The nervous system must come down after a spike. The body must relax after some bodily fluids, like maybe tears, right, are released. Sometimes in pop astrology, in memes that you see on the internet, we tend to see that earth signs or earth element is considered boring, right? I remember when I first found out that I'm a Virgo rising, after having trained as a performer all my life up to that point and having that aspiration, right, I was really disappointed because I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is not Leo, right? I wish I were a Leo rising. There's this tendency for us to see the earth as being boring, not very exciting, as being petty, right? As being too concerned with maybe survival or material accumulation. But honestly, in my experience and my observation as an astrologer, as someone who really loves kind of hanging out with, contemplating the cosmic energies, this is not true. It's interesting thinking about how our relationship to water and earth signs, right, as the elements that are traditionally associated with the receptive principle, with the nocturnal realm, with the night sect, versus our relationship with fire and air, right, which are active, directive, diurnal, associated with the day sect, right? It's interesting to think about how they differ and the kinds of prejudice or assumptions or fears even that we experience with the receptive principles, right? I think there's quite a lot of conditioning for us. With water often associated with our intuition, with our tears, right? We've been taught to suppress it. How many times, do you see a child crying because they are uncomfortable, right, in a public place for whatever reason, or just needed to express something, and you see the adults around them trying to calm them down, in the fear of being embarrassed, right? It's so interesting that tears are so often, as someone who is socialized or grew up socialized as male or as, a boy, right? I always receive conditioning that it's not okay to cry, when actually tears are really just our body's way, right? To to release energy, to release tension, right? And it's actually quite neutral. But we assign, as humans within society, we assign so many values around this, right? And then with Earth, I've also been thinking a lot about how the word dirty, right, is literally dirty, right? Like basically someone just has a lot of dirt on them, and similarly, even using that word, right? Like, I have dirt on you. It's like as if dirt is something to be ashamed of. It's so interesting that even the language that we use, right, reflects how we have internalized prejudice against these elements, right? We literally come from the dirt. We are earth, right? We are nourished by the earth. Without the earth, you literally cannot eat. You literally don't have a place to live. We live on planet Earth where gravity connects us to Earth literally 99.9% of the time, right? Unless you live in space. Or unless you're on an airplane. And so we come from Earth, we return to Earth, but we've been taught to fear the cycle of our true, authentic connection to Earth, right? We've been taught that to have dirt in our clothes or in our body is antithetical to being a civilized person. Like often when we see someone with dirty clothing, we think that they are less than somehow, right? So back to Earth coming after fire. I think it's interesting to think about the past week and notice what about what transpired was noise, right? What about it wasn't the truth of the situation, but kind of a disturbance around the energetic field of a situation or a relationship or the things that were being said, right? And I want to iterate that it's not that noise isn't important, right? I think this is a very important point, because often the word noise, right, is used to discredit something, right? It's like, oh, that's just noise. You don't need to pay attention to that. But I do think that noise adds to our lived experience, right? There's a reason why noise exists. In the world of music, we can think about elements that are non-essential and yet provides vibe, right? Or provides some level of experience that makes something or maybe a particular musical track more interesting, right, than without that element. Like, for example, I'm thinking about the shaker, right? If you have a song where a singer is singing a melody, right, and then there's a harmonic instrument that accompanies it, maybe a guitar or harp or maybe the keyboard, right, or piano, and then there's also a shaker, right? The shaker definitely gives like extra vibes, right? It moves the spirit, it stirs something within us. But it's also, the shaker doesn't hold the melody, right? The shaker is not the song itself. Like often when I hear the shaker part literally sounds the same in any song, right? If you've heard like, oh my gosh, a million songs that have the shaker part, literally the shaker sounds the same. Like if I isolate the shaker part, it wouldn't even sound different between one song and another, right? And so one can argue from that perspective that the shaker is not part of what's considered essential, if what we mean by essential is the backbone, right? The primary identifier of the song itself. Like you can still sing a song, right? You can still sing a melody even when there are no shakers around, right? You can still play it on an instrument that can play a melody even when no shakers are present. So similarly, I think one thing to contemplate for this coming week is this idea of what's not coming with us as we deepen into this realm of Earth, right? Again, it's interesting thinking about the transition between fire to Earth, right? Because quite a bit is dissipated, quite a bit is calmed down when we move from fire to Earth. what was already gone, what already went up in flames as a result of Aries season, and maybe more specifically the solar eclipse in Aries, right? And what is still here for us to work with. Something to consider is the impact of fire, right? The ignition, the activation, the explosion, the burning. When there has been fire, there also tends to be ashes, right? So how are we dealing with the aftermath of that fire? Are there any somatic processes that we need to engage with in order to complete the cycle of what that fire activated? What type of spiritual practices do we need to engage with in order to come home to ourselves, right? I think perhaps most importantly, with Saturn being in Pisces, Mars being in Cancer, both of them are malefics in sensitive, all-encompassing water signs, right? What can we do to allow our emotions and our emotional reactions to really move through us? So the last episode that I shared before this episode, episode 70, I had my dear friend Natasha Levenger talk about inner child healing. And if you missed that episode, my recommendation is for you to revisit that conversation, because there were so many gems in that conversation about working with these very tender parts of us, right? The inner child, the inner critic. And I would also highly recommend that you check out Natasha's book, Healing Your Inner Child, as a resource to refer to. Especially if you are listening to this episode and you're kind of nodding your head along, right? And you're deep in that process of feeling your emotions. Something that I really have been thinking about, as I have been sitting with that episode, is that our emotions are here to be moved through us, right? Oftentimes, it's not the emotions themselves that are the quote unquote problem, right? No matter how insane the emotions may feel, how nonsensical they seem to our analytical minds, often it's really the constipation around these emotions, right? The holding back, the repressing that can be causing distortions on an energetic, physical, mental level, right? And so Mars and Saturn, both being in water signs, may bring the energetic or maybe the very tangible support, which often, by the way, with regards to malefics, come in the form of confrontation, right? That which you can no longer avoid, for you to fully feel your feelings this week. I'm also considering how Mars and Saturn are both sextiling the Sun and Uranus, right? And so illuminations around the feelings that you've been bottling up may be inevitable. It may seem like it is so in your face that you can no longer avoid it. And something surprising may really come up for you when you allow yourself to really investigate and follow these emotional reactions, right? So that's something to consider. And finally, another reminder that Mercury is still retrograde. And so some knowing may have been revealed for you during the solar eclipse, right? And this may be a cognitive knowing, or it may be a felt sense like, this situation is no longer right for me, or I need to release something, right? And I would say that it's important, maybe always, but definitely during Mercury retrograde, to not rush into conclusions and to not make huge life-changing decisions based on the information that surfaced, if you are still feeling some level of activation around it, right? If there's still this feeling of like, it's still moving through me, I need to act now, like I think this is such a great indicator, right? Of something not fully completing its cycle, because we tend to have this feeling of like, I need to do it now. Like there's this sense of urgency that comes up when an emotion or a particular activation hasn't fully run its course, right? So my recommendation would be for you to really let yourself, permission yourself fully to be with the grief, with the rage, with the discomfort, with the annoyance that comes up, right? With the confusion, that comes up, that may come up. And I think what is hopefully helpful is to remind you that the practice of being with difficult emotions is a practice, right? Which means the point is not to be perfect. Healing doesn't look like getting rid of these emotions. As humans, these things come up, right? Emotions come up, conflicts come up. So, what if you allow your spiritual practices or breath work or yoga or running or gardening practice to be about creating pathways of release so you can be more grounded in your experience rather than transcending these challenging emotions and sensations, right? I think it's interesting that there are a lot of spiritual traditions that are about transcending things, right? And I think transcending certainly has its place. And also, I think we are in this, in our collective field right now, we are at a point where we have the tools and we have the conscious awareness to know that all states of being, all emotions are valid, right? That all of them are teachers. That it's not really about transcending them, but it's about integrating them, right? Seeing what they are here to teach us and then allowing them to teach us the thing that they are supposed to teach us. And so again, my reminder is to continue to create some conscious separations between you and your mental processes, right? This doesn't mean, of course, don't use your brain, right? Use your brain, please. The world needs people who use their brain. But can you validate your thoughts? Can you validate your experiences without fully believing in them? So I also pulled a couple cards because I wanted to kind of ground this a little further before I let you go for the week and I release you into your week. And so the two cards that I pulled were the Magician from the White Sage Tarot by Theresa Hutch, which, by the way, I got the tin version. I don't know. I'll send you a picture. You can see it when you check out the show notes. And it's really cute because it's a smaller deck by size and it's in a tiny little can, and I think it's going to be my new traveling deck. And I also pulled the King from Kim Kranz's Wild Unknown Archetypes deck. Both the Magician and the King are extremely powerful, very diurnal archetypes, right? So it's interesting that these two archetypes are showing up for us as guides when the energetic pool, the energetic atmosphere vibe is very nocturnal, right? With a lot of water and earth. So I think this is really interesting because it's kind of reminding me to remind you that it's not really a time to just kind of sit around and do nothing, right? That it's really important to allow whatever information you have received from the solar eclipse from the past week and the astrological kind of shifts that happen, right? The energy, which I'm sure a lot of you listening to this were really aware of, the intensity of that energy, right? This week is not the week for you to just kind of say, okay, we're done with the week, let's move on, right? This is the week where some very active processes, right, internally may be happening, right? I like seeing how very diurnal archetypes can come through during very nocturnal transits, because it's a reminder that the nocturnal is not passive, right? It's not just sitting there around doing nothing, right? There's something in allowing ourselves to maybe reflect on our experiences that's really active, and it should be honored as such. So if you look at the card, this Magician card is showing an eye and a feather, and then the king card shows a hand without a body, right? And what I'm getting out of these two cards together is to remember the power of approaching life with a light touch, right? And I want to clarify a little bit about what I personally mean when I'm talking about approaching life with a light touch, right? To me, a light touch doesn't mean avoiding things. The light touch doesn't mean you tiptoe around things. The light touch doesn't mean you don't engage, right? When engagement is necessary, when engagement is called for, right? But to me, the light touch means that you allow yourself to only do the bare minimum based on a certain level of trust that everything will work out well. So here's a question to ponder from the two cards. What if you believe that everything will turn out fine in the end? What will you stop doing? What will you start doing? What will you continue to do? And I think this last piece is really important, right? Because my sense is, what was really coming up for me when these two cards came through, is that some of you may be engaged in the middle of a very important process, right? And this can be a project, this can be a start of a particular kind of relationship. This may be you listening to a dream that has been hidden deeply within you. And you might find during the eclipses, something happened that either distracted you or you got a little discouraged, right? You may see some reflection from your lived reality that, this is not really the thing to do. You know, there's no confirmation, or you might encounter certain kinds of challenge, right? And so my invitation is that if something is coming up for you, as I'm saying that, allow yourself to go back to the thing, right? Because what if the disturbance you were perceiving or that you were experiencing wasn't really a sign that you were moving in the wrong direction? And instead, what if it's a sign that you are here to learn something, to cultivate a skill, or cultivate a relationship with a particular tool that you didn't realize that this relationship needed cultivating, right? And so what seemed like a roadblock may simply be a teacher. It may be a teacher that appeared in your path as a sign, actually not of invalidation, but rather of confirmation that you are on the right path, right? And so that's my challenge for you this week. If everything will turn out well, what will you regret doing when you look back at this particular time, right? And what will you regret not doing? And try to move from that perspective. Try to move from that place of consideration. Okay, my friends, that is it by way of contemplation for this week. I actually absolutely love weeks where there is not a lot of kind of insane astrological shift, because I feel like these weeks after major transitions or transition points astrologically, they tend to be such fertile grounds. Like there is something very illuminating about staying with the process, right, after the fireworks. I think there's something so, and maybe this is just me being a Virgo rising. You know, Virgo also comes after Leo, after a fire sign, right? But I really love this idea of kind of, just allowing yourself to sit on your car, right? Not taking off the seatbelt during the insanity of the traffic, right? And then you get to a place where it's more quiet, and then now you can just let the car drive around, and then you can listen to music. I think there's something really cool about weeks after very intense astrological occurrences, because there's a lot of space for reflection, for contemplation. There's a lot of space for inner realizations, right? That may not be available because clarity was really elusive when there's so much going on, right? And sometimes we're just kind of in survival mode. So I hope you take such good care of yourselves as always. I'm available for a limited number of sessions in the next coming weeks. And yeah, if you are looking into restarting or starting a meditation, breathwork practice, I have talked about this app before, but the Open app is incredible. I have a code that you can use that you can try them out for free for 30 days. And it's incredible. I love this app so much. I mostly use it for breathwork and meditation, and there are some very short meditations, like 3 to 5 minute meditations, that are so beautifully curated, beautifully recorded. The music there is incredible, and it's so perfect. If you are the kind of person who can't really sit down for like a 30-minute meditation, having these pocket-sized 3 to 5 minute meditations are so helpful, and you can so easily integrate them into your life, right? Yeah. And finally, if you have been enjoying this podcast, if you are getting something out of these weekly contemplations, first of all, thank you for listening. And second of all, if you would be so kind to consider leaving a review, that would be so amazing. I love reading all the reviews that have been coming through. Those of you who have written the reviews, thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you so, so much. And yeah, literally, if you haven't, and if you feel like helping out the podcast, if you feel like allowing the algorithm to let this podcast be delivered to more people, you can leave a very short review. It literally can be 4 to 5 sentences. It'll take you no more than 5 minutes to write a thoughtful review. Cool. Okay. I am wishing you such beautiful, easeful integration, as easeful as possible. And I am sending you so much love. Thank you so much for listening.